Politico just published the document Brussels never wanted you to see. An emergency plan. Written in secret. By European diplomats. And the plan has one purpose: to destroy Viktor Orbán. Before, during, and after April 12th. This is not a theory. This is not speculation. This is a leaked document from inside the European Council. Published by Politico. Cited by name. With quotes from senior EU diplomats who spoke on condition of anonymity. And what is inside that document is the most shocking admission Brussels has ever made. Because the plan does not just talk about freezing money. It does not just talk about removing voting rights. It does not just talk about changing the rules. The plan talks about expelling Hungary from the European Union entirely. Let that sink in. A founding member adjacent country, a nation of 10 million people, a democratically elected government. And Brussels is writing emergency plans to remove that country from the bloc, because its prime minister keeps saying no. This is the story mainstream media will not connect for you, and it starts with a single sentence from a senior EU diplomat. If Orbán wins, the gloves are off. 5 words, spoken anonymously. Published in Politico. And nobody in the European press asked the obvious follow-up question: what does that mean for democracy? Let us go through the plan. Because Brussels built it in layers, each layer more extreme than the last. Layer 1, change the voting system. Right now, major EU decisions on foreign policy and the budget require unanimity. Every member state has a veto. That is not a courtesy. That is a treaty right. Written into the founding documents of the European Union itself. But Brussels has a problem. One man keeps using that right. So the emergency plan proposes moving to qualified majority voting. 55% of countries, representing 65% of the EU population. What this means is simple. Hungary, with 10 million people in a bloc of 450 million, would be mathematically irrelevant. Its vote would count for nothing. Its veto would be gone. And the change would happen not through treaty revision, not through democratic process, but through a procedural vote. An internal rule change, no referendum, no public debate, no consent from the people it affects. Layer 2. Suspend all funding. 17 billion euros in EU funds earmarked for Budapest are already frozen. That number has been sitting there for years, used as a financial weapon to pressure the Hungarian government into compliance. But the emergency plan goes further. If Orbán wins on April 12th, the plan calls for a complete suspension of funding. Not a freeze, a suspension. Meaning the tap gets turned off entirely. And here is the part nobody is reporting. At the exact same time Brussels is building this punishment plan, the European Commission quietly confirmed that Orbán's government could receive approximately 2.4 billion euros in new funds before the election. Think about what that means. Brussels is dangling money in front of Hungary before the vote, and preparing to take everything away after the vote, if the result goes the wrong way. That is not a financial mechanism. That is a political trap, built in advance, with a door that only opens if Brussels likes what the ballot box produces. Layer 3. Strip the voting rights. This is the nuclear option that EU insiders have been discussing for years. Article 7 of the EU Treaty allows the bloc to suspend a member state's voting rights if it is found to be in serious breach of EU values. 7 years. That is how long the Article 7 procedure against Hungary has been running. 7 years without a resolution. Because it requires unanimous agreement from all other member states. And Slovakia has consistently blocked it. But the emergency plan proposes a workaround. If qualified majority voting is expanded, if Layer 1 of the plan succeeds, then Article 7 no longer needs unanimity. Hungary could be stripped of its vote without a single ally being able to stop it. A senior EU diplomat confirmed the logic directly. If the voting rules change, everything changes. Layer 4. Expel Hungary from the European Union. This is the option that even Politico described as the least likely. There is no precedent, no mechanism, no legal framework under current EU law for removing a member state against its will. But it is in the document. It is being discussed. And the reason it is being discussed is the most revealing detail of all. Multiple EU sources told Politico that blocking the 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine crossed a red line. That something needed to be done. That they did not know what. But that a second Orbán term was simply unacceptable. Unacceptable. That is the word being used inside Brussels to describe the democratic re-election of a sitting prime minister. Not illegal. Not unconstitutional. Unacceptable. And this brings us to the number that changes everything. 90 billion euros. That is the loan package for Ukraine that Orbán has blocked. That is the trigger. That is the red line. That is why Brussels is writing emergency plans and why EU diplomats are talking about expulsion. Not because Hungary violated EU law. Not because Budapest failed to meet legal obligations. But because one man stood between Brussels and 90 billion euros headed to Ukraine. And Brussels has decided that it is worth rewriting the rules of European democracy to stop. But here is what the emergency plan does not mention. What no mainstream European outlet will put in the same article. Orbán reversed his position on the Ukraine loan in December 2025. He agreed to it, and then, in what Politico called an unheard of maneuver in European politics, he reversed himself again. Because Ukraine refused to repair the Druzhba pipeline carrying Russian oil to Hungary after it was damaged. Hungary needs that oil, not as a political statement, not as a favor to Moscow, because it is how Hungarian families pay affordable energy bills. Because Orbán said publicly that without the pipeline deal, energy costs for ordinary Hungarians would be 3 times higher. He blocked 90 billion euros for Ukraine because Ukraine blocked a pipeline for Hungary. And Brussels responded by writing a plan to expel him from the European Union. Now let us talk about what else is happening simultaneously. Because Brussels does nothing in isolation. While the emergency plan was being drafted, the European Commission quietly softened its public criticism of Orbán. The Financial Times reported it directly. EU officials did not want to be seen as interfering in the Hungarian election. They wanted to avoid giving Orbán more ammunition for his anti-Brussels campaign. Let that contradiction sit for a moment. The same institution that is writing a secret plan to change the voting system, freeze all funds, strip voting rights, and potentially expel Hungary. That same institution is publicly going quiet to avoid the appearance of election interference. One face for the cameras. Another face in the document. And there is one more detail. One more piece that mainstream media has not placed in the same frame. Ukraine transferred approximately 120 million euros to the Hungarian opposition party TISA in the 6 months before the election. This was reported directly. It is on the record. The money went to the party led by Peter Magyar, the man Brussels has been describing as the alternative to Orbán. The man the EU 5-step plan was waiting for in step 2. Wait for Orbán's electoral defeat. That was step 2 of the plan leaked earlier this year. And the money to make that defeat happen came from Ukraine. The same country whose 90 billion euro loan Orbán blocked. The same country whose pipeline repair Orbán demanded. Think about the full picture. Brussels freezes 17 billion in EU funds. Ukraine transfers 120 million to Orbán's opponent. The EU writes an emergency plan for after the election, and simultaneously tells its commissioners to go quiet in public so nobody notices. A senior EU diplomat told Politico exactly what happens if Orbán wins. Many believe a red line was crossed. Something needs to be done. But it is unclear what. Unclear what. Those 2 words are the most important in this entire story. Because they reveal that Brussels is not operating from principle. It is not operating from law. It is operating from panic. It built a plan because it felt it had to do something. And it does not know yet what that something will be. That is not governance. That is improvisation. Dressed up in bureaucratic language and leaked to a Brussels-friendly publication. And now April 12th is 8 days away. The polls show a tight race. Independent surveys give Magyar a lead of 8 to 12 points. Government-aligned surveys show Orbán ahead. The betting markets have Magyar at 57%. But Fidesz has won 8 consecutive by-elections. And TISA has not contested a single one of them. Who wins on April 12th? Nobody can say for certain. But here is what we do know. If Orbán wins, Brussels has a plan. And that plan, by the admission of EU diplomats themselves, involves options that have never been used in the history of the European Union. Changed voting rules, frozen funds, stripped voting rights, and in the most extreme scenario, expulsion. All triggered not by a legal violation, not by a coup, not by a constitutional crisis, but by a democratic election that produced a result Brussels did not want. And the question that no European commissioner will answer on camera is the same question that every citizen in every EU member state should be asking right now. If they will do this to Hungary for voting the wrong way, what will they do to the next country that disagrees? The plan is not just about Orbán. Orbán is the test case, the precedent, the proof of concept. If Brussels can change the voting rules, freeze the funds, and strip the rights of one member state because it kept saying no, then the blueprint exists for every member state that follows. The emergency plan was written for Hungary, but the lesson it teaches is for all of Europe. And in 8 days, when the votes are counted in Budapest, we will find out whether Brussels gets to use it. Subscribe. Because whatever happens on April 12th, the story does not end there. It is only just beginning, and there is one final detail that pulls everything together. One number that Brussels hoped you would never connect to this story. 2.4 billion euros. That is the amount the European Commission confirmed could be released to Hungary before Election Day. Before April 12th. While the emergency plan is sitting in a drawer in Brussels. While the diplomats are drafting expulsion scenarios. While 17 billion remains frozen. 2.4 billion. Arriving just weeks before the vote. Why now? The Commission spokesperson said the timing was determined exclusively by required analytical and procedural work. Nothing to do with the election. Absolutely nothing. But here's the timeline. In December 2025, the EU promised the Ukraine loan would start flowing from January 2026. It never happened. Because Orbán reversed his position on the pipeline, Brussels responded by softening its public statements to avoid looking like it was interfering, and then quietly confirmed that 2.4 billion in previously frozen funds could arrive in Hungary before voting day. Money before the election. Emergency plan after the election. The carrot and the stick. Deployed simultaneously. By the same institution that insists is not interfering in Hungarian democracy. This is the pattern. This is the system. And it has been running for years. Just never all at once, never this transparently, and never with a leaked document proving it existed in writing. Brussels built the emergency plan because it is afraid, not of Orbán personally, not of Hungary specifically, but of what Orbán represents. One man. One veto. 16 years in power, 90 billion blocked. Every summit survived. Every threat absorbed. Every fine, every freeze, every diplomatic pressure campaign. And he is still there. If Brussels cannot stop Orbán, then the model breaks. The idea that Brussels can manage, pressure, and ultimately override any member state that refuses to comply. That idea depends on compliance eventually arriving. On the other side eventually blinking. Orbán has not blinked. And so the emergency plan exists. Because Brussels is preparing for a world where the model has already failed. Where one man won. And where the only remaining question is how far Brussels is willing to go to pretend otherwise. April 12th is 8 days away. The document is real. The quotes are on record. The plan is in place. And the only thing Brussels cannot plan for is the vote itself. Subscribe. Because when the result comes in, you will want to already be here.